There's a story most Americans still don't know, a story about power, loyalty, and a Supreme Court justice who changed everything for Donald Trump. And I'm going to tell you exactly what happened because somebody needs to. I'm Bill Clinton, at least a version of me, sitting here trying to make sense of what's happening to our democracy. And if you want to understand what's really going on behind the marble columns and closed doors of the Supreme Court, stay with me. This is Find the Vision, and we don't do surface level here. Picture this, early 2024, Donald Trump is drowning in legal trouble. Multiple criminal indictments, prosecutors circling, and his entire strategy comes down to one word: delay. Delay until after the election. Delay until he might be president again. Because if he wins, those problems disappear. He pardons himself, fires prosecutors, walks free. But if justice moves fast, if trials happen before November, his political future dies in a courtroom. So the question hanging over everything was simple. Would the Supreme Court help him run out the clock? Would they give him the time he desperately needed? And would Justice Clarence Thomas be the one to make it happen? Here's what you need to know. This isn't about one justice having conservative views. I've worked with conservative judges my whole career. This is about something far more troubling, a conflict of interest so obvious, so undeniable, that any other judge in America would be forced off the case immediately. But at the Supreme Court, different rules apparently. Let me introduce you to someone. Ginni Thomas, Clarence Thomas's wife. Not a quiet spouse staying out of politics. A full-blown political activist who was neck-deep in efforts to overturn the 2020 election. We're talking text messages to Mark Meadows, Trump's chief of staff, urging him to fight the results. We're talking attendance at rallies, connections to groups that organized January 6th. This wasn't casual interest. This was active participation in trying to keep Trump in power. Now pause right there. If your spouse is texting the White House about overturning an election, and then cases about that election come before you as a judge, what do? The answer is obvious to everyone except apparently Clarence Thomas. You recuse yourself. You step aside. You say, I can't be impartial here because my family is too close to this. But Thomas didn't recuse himself. Not once. Not when Trump's immunity cases reached the court. Not when January 6th cases appeared. He sat in judgment on matters his own wife had been actively working to influence. That decision, that choice to stay involved when ethics demanded he step back, that's what changed everything for Trump. I've appointed Supreme Court justices. I know the weight of that responsibility. You're trusting someone to rise above politics, to be guided by the Constitution, not personal loyalties. For most of our history, we believed they tried to do that. But what happens when that trust is shattered? What happens when a justice refuses to recuse himself from cases where he obviously should? You can't fire a Supreme Court justice. Lifetime appointment? Congress could impeach, but that needs 2/3 of the Senate, which today is fantasy. So you're stuck. The American people are stuck watching a system that's supposed to be above reproach slowly lose its credibility, one compromise decision at a time. And Trump's legal team knew this. They built their entire strategy around Supreme Court delay. Every week the court deliberated was another week his trials got pushed back. Every procedural question they explored was another chance to get past the election. Look at the timeline. The court took Trump's immunity case in February 2024, scheduled arguments for late April, and didn't rule until July. By then, it was too late for trials to happen before voters went to the polls. Trump got exactly what he needed: time. Did Clarence Thomas's vote make the difference? We can't know for sure because those deliberations are secret, but we know he was part of the majority that decided to take the case and take their time with it. And we know his wife was texting the White House about the very events that led to these prosecutions. The appearance of impropriety couldn't be more obvious. Let me tell you what really gets me. When you're called for jury duty, they ask during selection, do you know anyone involved in this case? Any personal connection that might affect your judgment? If you say yes, you're dismissed immediately. The system recognizes that even the appearance of bias undermines justice. But at the Supreme Court, we're supposed to accept that a justice can rule on cases connected to his wife's political activism. The double standard is staggering. Think about what Ginni Thomas actually did. Text messages to Mark Meadows pushing election conspiracy theories, urging the administration to fight, not concede. She was in contact with John Eastman, the lawyer who wrote the memo saying Pence could refuse to certify electoral votes. She attended the January 6th rally. She was connected to groups that organized that day. This was comprehensive involvement in attempting to overturn a presidential election. And when cases related to all of that reached the Supreme Court, her husband sat in judgment. No recusal. No acknowledgement of any conflict. Just business as usual. Except it's not usual. It's unprecedented. And it's corroding public trust in the one institution that's supposed to be above politics. I had my share of legal troubles as president. The investigations, the impeachment, all of it. But here's the difference. When my cases went to court, I never had a Supreme Court justice whose spouse was actively working to defend me. The court ruled against me sometimes, for me other times, but the process had integrity. People might have disagreed with outcomes, but they didn't question whether the game was rigged at the highest level. That's what we've lost. That fundamental sense that even when the system is adversarial, even when it's painful, it's still fair. Once people believe the Supreme Court is just another political arena where connections matter more than law, you're in dangerous territory. You're watching institutional legitimacy collapse in real time. And here's what keeps me up at night. This sets a precedent. Future justices are watching. They're learning that ethics rules are suggestions, not requirements. That as long as you have political support, you can get away with conflicts that would destroy anyone else's career. Every time someone pushes the boundaries and faces no consequences, those boundaries move a little further. That's how democracies erode, not in one dramatic collapse, but through small compromises that accumulate over time. I've talked to legal scholars, serious people who've spent their lives studying how democracies survive or fail, and they're genuinely worried. Some use the term constitutional crisis. Others talk about institutional decay. These aren't partisan hacks. These are experts who understand that when the Supreme Court loses public trust, there's no easy way to rebuild it. Trust takes generations to build and moments to destroy. Let me be specific about the immunity case because it matters. Trump's lawyers argued that former presidents have broad immunity from criminal prosecution. Most constitutional scholars found this theory absurd, but it was also a theory that, if the court took seriously and deliberated slowly, could delay trials indefinitely. And that's exactly what happened. The court agreed to hear it, scheduled arguments months out, and took their sweet time deciding. By the time they ruled in July, it was too late for the most serious trials to proceed before the election. Trump got his delay. He got his chance to run for president again, potentially without facing a jury first. And Justice Thomas was part of the majority that made that possible, despite his wife's direct involvement in the events underlying the prosecutions. Whether that was intentional coordination or just convenient timing, the effect is the same. The fix looked in. Now, some people will say I'm being unfair to Thomas, that I'm questioning his integrity without proof, but that's exactly the point. We shouldn't have to wonder. We shouldn't have to question whether a justice's ruling was influenced by his spouse's political activism. The appearance of impropriety is itself the problem. Justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done. And when Ginni Thomas is texting the White House about overturning an election, and Clarence Thomas is ruling on cases about presidential accountability, we can't see impartial justice. We see something else entirely. This could have been avoided so easily. If Thomas had recused himself, the court could have decided these cases with 8 justices. Would the outcome have been different? Maybe, maybe not, but at least there wouldn't be this cloud of suspicion hanging over everything. At least the American people could have confidence that the process was fair, even if they disagreed with the result. But Thomas chose differently. He chose to stay involved despite the obvious conflict, and in making that choice, he gave Donald Trump something invaluable. He gave him the gift of time and the appearance of legitimacy for a legal strategy that depended on the Supreme Court's cooperation, whether active or passive. I want you to understand what this means for the future. If we accept that Supreme Court justices don't need to recuse themselves from cases involving their spouse's political activities, we're accepting that the highest court in the land operates under different ethical standards than every other court in America. We're accepting that power and connections matter more than impartiality. We're accepting institutional corruption as the price of doing business. And once we accept that, there's no going back. The precedent is set, the boundaries are moved, and the next time it happens, it'll be a little worse, a little more brazen, until eventually we wake up in a country where the Supreme Court is just another political prize to be won and wielded, not an institution that constrains power and protects rights. So, what did Justice Clarence Thomas do to Donald Trump? He gave him time, he gave him cover, he gave him the appearance that even the highest court in the land was willing to bend the rules for him, and most Americans still don't know the full story. They don't know about Ginni's texts. They don't know about the recusal Thomas should have made but didn't. They don't know how close we came, or maybe how far we've already gone, toward losing faith in the one institution that's supposed to be above all this. Now you know. And the question is, what are we going to do about it? Because if we don't demand better, if we don't insist on accountability even at the Supreme Court, then we're complicit in the decay. Democracy doesn't die in darkness, it dies in plain sight when good people see what's wrong and decide it's not worth the fight. This is worth the fight. Our institutions are worth defending, and the first step is understanding exactly what happened and refusing to accept it as normal.